So is this really down to he or she that has the data wins? And that's why this is so important.
Well, it's very important, obviously, but I think for Bernie Sanders to actually win, it would take a lot more than just having access to this data. I mean, let's be real about the situation here. He's generated an awful lot of grassroots enthusiasm for this campaign. You see it in the crowds he draws. You see it in the donation statistics he just put up there. You see it in a lot of other measurements. However, if you look at Iowa, she's ahead right now, probably by about 10 points. If you look at New Hampshire, there's a new poll out there today that actually has him up by 2 points there. So those two early states, yes, very competitive right now. However, take a jump past those first two states. Look at South Carolina. Look at the big states that come after Iowa and New Hampshire. They're bigger. They are much more diverse. They are much more reflective of what the Democratic Party is today. And Bernie Sanders is getting swamped. And I cannot emphasize this enough. He is getting swamped in those states. And a big reason for that is, and his campaign's well aware of this, among African-American voters, he is getting absolutely blown out in this campaign. We are talking 50, 60, 70 points behind, depending on the poll you look at, and that translates into major deficits in these states. This is something Bernie Sanders has been focusing on for months.
Steve, let me jump in.
Yep.
They're about to begin. Let's go ahead and listen.
2 months ago, shortly after our digital vendor, who conducts modeling for our campaign, told us that there was a failure in the firewall that prevents campaigns from seeing one another's data, we contacted the DNC and told them about this failure. We were very concerned that our data had been compromised, and we were assured at that time that the firewall between the campaign's data would be restored. We are actually very confident that at that time some of our data was lost to one of the other campaigns. Instead, we found out 2 days ago that once again this sensitive and important data was compromised because the DNC and its vendor failed to protect it. We have invested enormous campaign resources in acquiring the rights to use this proprietary data. But the DNC, in an inappropriate overreaction, has denied us access to our very own data. This is data collected by hundreds of thousands of volunteers across America. This database for our campaign is funded by the over 2 million contributions that this campaign has received from people all across the country. Let me briefly discuss 3 issues involved in this matter. First, as I pointed out earlier, this is not the first time that the vendor hired by the DNC and the DNC to run the voter file program, NGP Van, has allowed serious failures to occur. On more than one occasion, they have dropped the firewall between the data of competing Democratic campaigns. This is dangerous incompetence. It was our campaign months ago that alerted the DNC to the fact that the campaign data was being made available to other campaigns. At that time, our campaign did not run to the media, relying instead on assurances from the vendor that the problem would be resolved. Unfortunately, the other day, the vendor once again dropped the firewall between the campaigns for some data. Secondly, after discussion with the DNC, it became clear that some of our staffers irresponsibly accessed some of the data from another campaign. That behavior is unacceptable to the Sanders campaign, and we fired the staffer immediately and made certain that any information obtained was not utilized. We are now speaking to other staffers who might have been involved, and further disciplinary action may follow. Clearly, while the information was made available to our campaign because of the incompetence of the vendor, it should not have been looked at, period. Third, rather incredibly, the leadership of the DNC has used this incident to shut down our ability to access our own information, information which is the lifeblood of this campaign. This is the information about our supporters, our volunteers, the lists of people we intend to contact in Iowa, New Hampshire, and elsewhere. This is information we have worked hard to obtain. As I mentioned before, this is information gathered by our volunteers across the country, funded by the over 2 million individual contributions we received online. It is our information and the information of all of these volunteers and the people who support our campaign, not the DNC's. In other words, by their action, the leadership of the Democratic National Committee is now actively attempting to undermine our campaign. This is unacceptable. Individual leaders of the DNC can support Hillary Clinton in any way they want, but they are not going to sabotage our campaign, one of the strongest grassroots campaigns in modern history. We are announcing today that if the DNC continues to hold our data hostage and continues to try to attack the heart and soul of our grassroots campaign, we will be in federal court this afternoon seeking immediate relief. What is required here is a full and independent audit of the DNC's mishandling of this data and its security from the beginning of this campaign to the present, including the incident in October that we alerted them to when we are fairly confident that large amounts of our data were sent to another campaign. Thank you very much. This is Brad Deutsch, who represents the campaign on our legal team, and I'm happy to answer any questions that people might have.
Can you assure the DNC and the Clinton campaign that you no longer possess any of the Clinton campaign's data?
I can tell you that this campaign, in an official capacity, does not possess any data, does not retain any data, doesn't want any of their data. In fact, when their data, due to this October breach, was dumped into a vendor of ours' computer system, we had it isolated, locked up, and we alerted the DNC immediately. We're running a clean campaign. We're going to beat Secretary Clinton and everybody else in this campaign on the issues. We don't need dirty tricks. That's not how we run it here.
Which campaign do you think had access to your data a couple months ago?
Well, I think after this independent audit, we will find that out. Look, we're investigating that. One of the ironies of this situation is because the DNC has inappropriately cut us off from access to the VAN, the voter network, it makes it impossible for us to do any kind of independent review of who looked at what during that time period. So what we did is we immediately froze the email accounts of all employees we suspected were involved. We reviewed all of their emails and Google documents. We restored any documents or emails that they had deleted during the relevant time periods and have reviewed them all. And the investigation internally is ongoing. You know, in the heat of these campaigns, sometimes young people make misjudgments.
How do you know
right?
that data wasn't used?
Because I manage this campaign. I know data is being used.
Was anything downloaded?
No data that I'm aware of was exported in a way that could be used by anybody.
Sir, NBC had documents to show that up to 10 early voting states may have been accessed and that efforts were made to store the data, and that as many as 4 campaign staffers.
NGP issued an after-action report which said that none of these reports were printed and none of them were exported. So I'm relying on NGP, and I have to rely on them. Unfortunately, the DNC's monopoly vendor has sole access to this information because we've been cut off from it. So whatever you're hearing from them, you're getting their side of the story, and has not been verified by us, and that's why we look forward to a full, independent audit of the DNC's handling of data going forward.
Practically, how can this inhibit your campaign from getting out the vote in Iowa, New Hampshire?
Look,
Explain how it
this is taking our campaign hostage. We have a grassroots campaign, right? So when we have people come to our campaign headquarters to call volunteers or to call voters to talk to them about Bernie Sanders' campaign to transform America, we can't generate phone numbers to do that. It's impossible to mobilize the kind of grassroots campaign we have without access to that data. And we are, because of the nature of our campaign, peculiarly affected by this type of taking of data hostage by the DNC.
does it make it impossible for you to win?
It does not make it impossible to win, because I think people across this country, and I think we're beginning to see it now already online, are outraged by this conduct by the DNC, which is clearly a heavy-handed attempt to undermine this campaign.
Has the DNC given you any indication how long they plan to freeze your access to their database?
To our data. How long they're going to freeze our access to our own data? They have not. And that's why we're going to have to go to federal court if this is not resolved very, very shortly, to vindicate the rights not only of this campaign, but of the millions of people across this country who want change.
Is the DNC taking sides with the Clinton campaign?
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Once it was already fired, but it's been reported that many as 4 or 5 access this data, are you aware of anyone else?
Well, as I mentioned, you know, we are doing an internal investigation. Further disciplinary action may come, depending on what we find. But the truth is that our ability to investigate this has been inhibited by our inability to look at the VAN that's been withheld from us. So the DNC is by their own action, is hindering our ability to do the kind of investigation that they say that they want.
Your former staffer says he wasn't trying to collect data on the Clinton campaign. He was just trying to probe the extent of this vulnerability. Is it possible you overreacting and firing?
We have very, very high ethical standards in this campaign, right? Bernie Sanders is a different kind of candidate. We're running a campaign to transform America. So people who work on this campaign have to understand that even the appearance of something that's not right is too much. And so we did let that staffer go. I think that was a clear signal that we take this very, very seriously, both with respect to our data and other people's data. We will certainly not use anybody else's data or retain anybody else's data. The DNC is clearly acting in a heavy-handed way, in an unprecedented way. I would like to see another instance where a presidential campaign had their data withheld, their own data withheld under similar circumstances. So,
2 months ago, you said senators know about this.
excuse me?
You said 2 months ago you learned about this?
2 months ago, we found out when we were downloading some of our data that it was dumping a bunch of other campaigns' data along with ours, which clearly indicated that the firewall between the campaigns was ineffective, right? We immediately segregated that information at our vendor, put it in a password-protected file, so that we could document that, in fact, there had been a breach, because we were very concerned that large amounts of our own data was being downloaded, and we contacted the DNC to remedy the situation. They assured us, we didn't run down here to all of you all, we talked to them, and we were assured that this was going to be taken care of. But apparently, they are not competent in terms of maintaining the security of data between the campaigns.
Is the DNC taking sides with the Clinton campaign, Jeff?
What's that?
Is the DNC taking sides with the Clinton campaign?
Sure. All I can tell you, I don't know the motivation of every single person of the DNC, but I think if you look at a pattern of conduct, we've obviously had concern about the, the Saturday night debate schedule and its impact on the ability of campaigns to get their message out. Clearly, there's, in this case, it looks like they are trying to help the Clinton campaign. We're taking on the establishment, and I'm sure there are people within the Democratic establishment who are not happy about the overwhelming success that Senator Sanders is having all across this country. But we are determined to win this campaign, and we're going to win this campaign by talking about the issues that are important to the American people. To do that, we need our data, which has been stolen by the DNC. That's what we want back. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
All right, so there we're hearing from Jeff Weaver, who is the campaign manager for Bernie Sanders. We did not see Bernie Sanders at this event. We also did not hear from the lawyer for the team, Brad Deutsch, but he was there, and they talked about the fact that they will end up in federal court this afternoon using very strong language if the DNC doesn't give back the information and access to their own curated files about their campaign, saying that this is incompetence of the DNC, that they brought this up to the DNC originally 2 months ago because of a firewall failure. And they're saying that it's basically the DNC's fault that this happened. Now, they also discussed their own liability of having a campaign staffer access and probe Clinton information. Now, they are saying that they did not retain or possess any Clinton information, that they wouldn't use it. Also, one of the bigger lines we got here from Weaver: we're running a clean campaign, no dirty tricks. Steve Kornacki remains with me, as does Joy Reid and Mark Murray in D.C. Steve, let me start with you about this. That's a big statement that they want to take this to a federal court this afternoon if the DNC doesn't unfreeze their access.
A couple big statements, outright saying the DNC has stolen their information, calling this a heavy-handed attempt to undermine this campaign. At one point there, Jeff Weaver said that he believes the DNC, in this case, is trying to help the Clinton campaign. He's coming out, putting into words in front of all of the national media, things that have been whispered, things that have been said sort of behind the scenes by the Sanders campaign for a long time about the Democratic National Committee, but now it is all out in the open. What I'm interested in, too, he alluded to, and he wasn't too specific on this, he alluded to, it seemed like the possibility that some Sanders campaign information from this file had fallen into the hands, he said, of another campaign, presumably the Clinton campaign. He didn't specify, though. I'd be curious to know more about that allegation, when that happened, what kind of information fell into the Clinton campaign's hands, if it did, and what the Clinton campaign did with it, if it did anything, because ultimately, for all of the history here, he's painting a picture of incompetent management on the part of the DNC, and certainly the picture that Weaver's painting here does point to that. But ultimately, there was an opportunity here for people on the Sanders campaign to get inside and to look at what the Clinton campaign had been putting together, and at least one person on the Sanders campaign took advantage of that opportunity. That is the one thing that we do know here. So it is a little bit like saying, hey, if the money falls off the Brinks truck, You know, is it the fault of the Brinks truck for the money falling off, or is it the fault of the person who picks it up and says, hey, this is mine now? So ultimately, there is culpability here on the part of the Sanders campaign. The question again to me is, he seemed to be suggesting this might have happened on the other side with the Clinton campaign. Is that something they can establish?
Yeah, I don't know if the finders keepers rule really is going to work here with that kind of information. And Martin O'Malley's team might have figured this out as well. If this was an issue for all the campaigns accessing their information curated through the DNC, if these firewalls are dropping, Mark, this would be obvious to anybody who was trying to access that, correct?
Yeah, and our understanding, Thomas, of all this software is that it is very traceable on who's accessed what, who's logged into the system. And in fact, NBC News has obtained documents showing that Bernie Sanders staffers were reviewing, in fact, saving files that seemed to be that were part of for the Clinton campaign and their information. But Thomas, look, I was really struck by the fact that you had the Sanders campaign emphasizing that they want their voter file data that has been taken from the DNC, or at least suspended temporarily from the DNC back, and emphasizing that a whole lot more than the transgression by one or multiple members of the Bernie Sanders campaign, where earlier this morning, even the Sanders campaign said that that kind of conduct was unacceptable. And one other thing in this entire riddle here, Thomas, is that Bernie Sanders is not a Democrat in this race. He is running for the Democratic nomination. He's on the ballot as a Democrat in New Hampshire and other states, but he caucuses with the Democrats, but he's an independent socialist. So having someone who is an independent now going to court, and his campaign going to court with the Democratic Party, is a fascinating subplot here.
Yeah, let's remind everybody exactly what Jeff Weaver had to say about that and whether or not they're going to end up in court today. Take a listen.
Individual leaders of the DNC can support Hillary Clinton in any way they want, but they are not going to sabotage our campaign, one of the strongest grassroots campaigns in modern history. We are announcing today that if the DNC continues to hold our data hostage and continues to try to attack the heart and soul of our grassroots campaign, we will be in federal court this afternoon seeking immediate relief.
So, Joy, the narrative really changes here. Not so much about Bernie Sanders' campaign and the staffer that had access to this. It's now a bigger deal about them being frozen out, and also this cozy relationship between the DNC and a Hillary Clinton, something the O'Malley campaign has brought up too, especially when it comes to this debate schedule.
Yeah, with everything from the debate schedule to the overall conduct of the DNC. If you've been listening to the Democratic side of the aisle, which a lot of people have not because there's been so much action on the Republican side, one of the things that has been a subplot has been the sense among supporters of Bernie Sanders, and to a smaller extent the supporters of Martin O'Malley, because there are fewer of them, that the Democratic National Committee has been putting its hand on the scale, its thumb on the scale in favor of Hillary Clinton, and has been essentially working to ensure that there was no rival to Hillary Clinton. And what Mark Murray just said, I think, is extremely important. You have to recall that there is only one leading Democrat in the Democratic race for president at the moment, and it is Hillary Clinton. Martin O'Malley's campaign has not had as much momentum. Bernie Sanders is not a Democrat, and yet he had access to this voter file. Now, the company, NGP Van, is a major vendor. It has worked on campaigns, everything from the Barack Obama presidential campaign all the way through, but its clientele consists of progressive and Democratic clients. Now you have a non-Democrat coming in with full access, and these are their own files. Again, it's not access to all the Democratic voter files, but this company essentially holds everything. If you want to do a phone bank, if you want to call in, if you want to do door knocking in Iowa, all that data is being held by this data security company. And so what you're hearing now from Sanders supporters and from the Sanders campaign is that the DNC, which is partial to Hillary Clinton, is now not letting them access their own data, information they gathered with their own money and their own resources. So this is a civil war, I guess you could call it, on the Democratic side of the aisle that's breaking out into the open.
All right, we have not heard anything yet from the Clinton campaign, or the O'Malley campaign for that matter, about this, but we expect to hear something probably pretty soon, that everybody's being thrown under the bus, that everybody had access to this, that these firewalls were down, and that the Sanders camp notified them 2 months ago about this issue. So why would the DNC only come after Bernie Sanders? It's a good question, right? We're going to talk about that and much more, about President Obama's year-ender press conference coming up this hour as well. Much more right here on MSNBC Live. Stick around. stressors coming out of that statement moments ago was the fact that they are willing to take the DNC to federal court because the DNC is now freezing out Sanders' campaign from their own data that's been provided by some 2 million people because of their grassroots effort. They are furious that they have been frozen out, and they say that the DNC is just trying to collude and get cozy with the Clinton campaign because of the fact that Bernie Sanders has had such success out on the campaign trail. But Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the chairwoman of the DNC, appeared with my colleague Tamron Hall earlier today to address this. Take a listen.
I would ask any Sanders supporters or anyone who is formulating an opinion about the actions that we've taken to put the shoe on the other foot. If it were the Clinton campaign that accessed the proprietary information of the Sanders campaign, you can be darn sure, understandably, that his supporters would expect that we would take the exact same action.
Steve Kornacki is back with me now. And Steve, the other accusation that came out of this is the fact that other campaigns have, or a campaign has accessed Sanders information. The DNC has not told any revelation about that. And also the Sanders camp didn't throw any other campaign under the bus about access.
Yeah, well, that was a very almost cryptic comment that was made by Jeff Weaver there. We need to find out more information about that because Jeff Weaver seemed to be saying two different things there. There was this breach that we're talking about right here where that firewall broke down and where somebody, this is what we know, somebody on the Sanders campaign, when that wall broke down, went looking into the Hillary Clinton side of that wall. That is why they're being disciplined. That is why their access is being shut off. He also seemed to be saying that there was another time where the wall broke down and they ended up in possession of some potential Hillary Clinton information. And their response to that was to immediately seal it off, to not look at it, to not do anything with it, and to alert the DNC. Now, if this happened on the other side, if Hillary Clinton at some point, Sanders' information fell into their hands and they responded the same way, then presumably there would be no need for the DNC to discipline the Hillary Clinton campaign for that, just as there'd be no need for the DNC to discipline the Sanders campaign for acting responsibly in the way Weaver described. Again, Weaver is saying, the Sanders campaign is sitting here saying, the problem here is the DNC. It's lax security. It's a firewall. It's incompetence. That does seem to be an issue here, but that is not the issue over which the Sanders campaign is losing its access to this database. The issue over which they're losing their access is because when that wall fell down, even if it was through the incompetence of the DNC, somebody on the Sanders campaign went looking through the Clinton side of the wall. And I think what Debbie Wasserman Schultz is saying there, certainly there's a lot to that, I think, because if Hillary Clinton's campaign were caught in this situation, I can guarantee you we'd be hearing from the Sanders campaign a lot of outrage right now.
Well, it almost appears it's as if this shiny distraction over here, let's talk about that as opposed to the facts of what we know. We know that a staffer from the Sanders campaign has been fired for inappropriately accessing this data. Also, Jeff Weaver claims that it was 2 months ago, back in October, that they notified the DNC about vendor issues, firewalls falling down, and the fact that there was access being granted or no security issues that should properly be there to keep people in their own lanes, and was allowing for this inappropriate access. Mark Murray, let me bring you back in. In modern memory, do you recall any political issues like this where there was some dirty campaigns trying to steal the other's information, especially when it came to this type of access issue?
Not on this type of access issue, Thomas. I mean, to go back in time, and the last time that there was a big blow-up about the DNC and potentially siding for one candidate over the other, I have to go back to the 2008 presidential campaign between Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton over what was going to be done about the delegates with Michigan and Florida. And I know those of us who followed that was a huge story back then. And that was the last time that really you had activists from both sides really up in arms over rules. That time, Howard Dean was the chairman of the Democratic National Committee. But, Thomas, it's important to note that after this story came out about a potential Bernie Sanders campaign accessing Clinton information from these voter files, what we ended up hearing from the DNC was that it was temporarily suspending Bernie Sanders from the overall voting file. And, of course, that's the very tough language that you've heard from the Bernie Sanders campaign, their threat to go to court all over this. But it is worth noting that Debbie Wasserman Schultz, in her interview earlier today on MSNBC, as as well as the statements we've received from the DNC, that as long as the DNC is able to get an assurance that nothing was downloaded still in the Bernie Sanders possession of these Clinton files, if they were downloaded and exported, that basically the Sanders campaign turns over everything. Because as I was mentioning to you earlier, a lot of this stuff is very traceable. It's to know who logged in and made what kind of action with this voter file. And if the DNC can get an assurance from the Sanders campaign, that's what they're saying, then they're happy to give access back to the file. I think what the DNC really wants is 100% assurance that they have, that the Sanders campaign doesn't have more than what they're actually saying.
Okay, so we heard from Jeff Weaver there. He said that they do not possess or retain any Clinton data, also saying, Mark, that they are running a clean campaign. They don't need the dirty tricks about this. So as you point out, this temporary suspension, the debate is tomorrow night. What is temporary to the DNC, especially if, as Weaver alludes to, other campaigns are guilty of this access, like Sanders' campaign?
Yeah, and that last point, as Steve was making, was very cryptic. And of course, we're dealing with the information that we do know. The statements we've received from the DNC, the statements we've gotten them from the Sanders campaign, and then, of course, the documents that NBC has been able to obtain that actually show that through this traceable logs that there was some poking around the Clinton proprietary information on these voting lists. And so how long this ends up getting resolved before tomorrow night's debate, I don't think that any of this gets resolved. Right. One other component, Thomas, about this whole taking legal action, and of course I'm not an attorney, but following as a reporter previous lawsuits against the DNC or the RNC, that it's sometimes very hard to be able to sue these groups because they are considered political parties. They get to make up the rules. Now, what the Sanders campaign is making the argument that the DNC is holding some of their proprietary information with these voter lists, so that's probably their argument there. But it gets really tricky if you try to actually have a lawsuit that you file in federal court, and the courts might say, you know what, these political parties get to make up their own rules. They're not the federal government. They're not a state or local government, and that's where it gets complicated.
Okay, so I'm not going to make you play a lawyer on TV, but Mark Murray, because Jeff Weaver alluded to the fact that other campaigns had access to their information, and they brought this to the attention of the DNC 2 months ago. To your point about how traceable all this information is, they might have evidence to back that up, and the DNC might want to get out ahead of that and put all their cards on the table if that's true.
Right, yeah, the DNC or even the vendor who's really responsible for all the software here. And that is right, Thomas, that if this is all that traceable and trackable, you can see that there would be footprints for everyone, maybe not in 24 hours or 48 hours, but pretty soon to be able to see who took what, who was able to log in at one point. So, yes, I think that is very understandable. But I do think that where the Sanders campaign is coming from, saying, we want this information, we want it back now, and the DNC has basically said, we're actually happy to resolve this and give it back to you, get your voter file information back. We just want an absolute assurance that you don't have any proprietary information from the Clinton campaign.
Okay, Mark, stand by, and I just want to remind everybody, we are awaiting President Obama's year-end news conference. You'll see that small box on the lower side of your screen where people are assembling in the White House press briefing room. We will be hearing from the president coming up here shortly. But Joy-Ann Reid is back at the table. You left to get on a campaign call from the Clinton folks. No call?
No, the call has been rescheduled, and this was actually a call that we were talking about, so the importance of the African-American vote. This was about African-American voters and the Clinton campaign efforts there, but that was rescheduled.
Okay, thanks so much. Steve Kornacki, I know you have somebody on the phone that is very pivotal to this whole storyline.
Yeah, that's right, Thomas. Josh Uretsky, he was running the digital operation for the Bernie Sanders campaign. He is the staffer who was fired by the Bernie Sanders campaign over this. He did not, I am told, he did not listen to or was not able to hear that press conference we just played. Nonetheless, he is obviously at the center of this. He joins us now by phone. Josh, thank you for taking a few minutes and joining us. Let me start with this. Apparently, from what we're told and from the documents that NBC News has been able to obtain here, a lot of what went on here is actually very traceable, very trackable, and what we're able to see from these documents is that people from your campaign for over 40 minutes were able to access, were able to look at, search, and make copies of Clinton supporter lists from her side of the wall. What is the justification for doing that?
So I want to start. First of all, I was doing data and not digital. Just to conflate things there. So I guess what I want to say is that we knew that what we were doing was trackable, and we were trying to create a clear record of a problem before reporting it, so that we could make sure we weren't crying wolf, and so that we understood the extent of the exposure of our data to any other political entity.
So are you saying you wanted to be able to prove to the DNC that you were able to access files from Hillary Clinton?
We had to assume that our data was equally exposed, and updated reports proved that show that it was, and we just wanted to document and understand the scope of the problem, so that we could report it accurately.
But I'm trying to figure out, when you're saying document the extent of the problem, does that mean you wanted to go through everything that Hillary Clinton had, and you wanted to see if she had anything you had?
No, what I mean is that we could see that there was a problem in security, and so we wanted to create a record on their system without taking any data for our own purposes.
But if this was traceable and trackable, you were making copies of her voter list, weren't you?
Well, I guess you could phrase it that way, but those systems were all within the Vote Builder VAN system, the Vote Builder DNC system. It was all within their custodianship, if that makes any sense. So we didn't, at least to my knowledge, we did not export any records of voter file data that were based on those scores. And so, yes, we did establish proof that there was a problem, so that A, we understood what that problem was, and B, we could accurately report that up the chain. And that did take us some time to figure out.
But what the problem, besides the firewall being down, what are you able to establish by going into her voter file? I think that's the confusing part to people here. If you went into her voter files, if you searched them, if you copied information from them, it basically sounds like you're telling me you're committing, it's not, crime is a strong word here, but you're committing the misdeed to prove it's possible to commit the misdeed.
Well, no, because we didn't actually, use it for anything valuable, and we didn't take custodianship of it. We didn't, it's like the equivalent of, I guess, the analogy maybe would be, somebody leaves the front door open for the 5th time. Although this was the first time that the van made a mistake like this, but somebody leaves the front door open and you left a note inside the front door saying you left the door open. And then maybe you went and checked the side door too to make sure that door was closed.
So do you feel like, our understanding again, how traceable and trackable this is, you have been fired from the campaign for this, but there were, I think, 4 others from the Sanders campaign, at least, who accessed this. None of them have been fired. Are they serving you up here?
No, look, I was in charge of the department, and it's my responsibility.
But from what you're describing to me, you're basically saying you don't feel you actually did anything wrong. Should you have been fired?
I think that, honestly, the system belongs to the DNC, and I did not believe at the time that I did it that they would think that what I was doing was wrong. Frankly, I did it knowing full knowledge that they could see what I was doing, and I did not at any time do something that I was going to try to hide from them. Knowing that they could see it, I did not expect them to react in the way that they did.
And in this press conference, I understand you didn't see the press conference, but one thing that Jeff Weaver was making reference to was that he said a suspicion in the campaign that Sanders information had been made available because of a previous breach in this firewall, that information from the Sanders campaign had become available to what he said was another campaign, presumably Hillary Clinton's campaign. I guess maybe it could have been Martin O'Malley's campaign. Is that something you can shed any light on, what specifically he's alluding to there?
Yeah, without going too much into specifics, there There was a previous time when it wasn't actually within the van vote builder system. It was another system that was provided to us by the DNC where we discovered and assessed the problem, and we reported that within about a day of having discovered it and trying to figure out exactly what it was and make sure that it wasn't something we were supposed to have.
But did you, again, I'm trying to make sense of what Weaver was saying happened here. Did your campaign establish or think it established that Hillary Clinton's campaign at any point got access to and reviewed your information?
We had to assume they had access to it. I did not conduct the audit, so I will rely on them to conduct an honest audit and establish that they did not view or access or whatever adjectives or verbs they're using to describe what happened. But I had to assume, like, look, thinking through how we know it was a bug in code that was pushed out Wednesday morning. We had to assume that happened sometime between 8 and 9 a.m. We found out about it at about 10:30, so we had to assume that our data had been exposed all morning. So, like, we had to know how exposed our data was. That was to me important.
All right, Jeff Uretsky.
That was my judgment call to try to find out how exposed our data was.
Josh Uretsky, formerly now with the Sanders campaign. We appreciate you taking a few minutes. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you.
All right, Thomas, send it back to you.
Steve, that was fascinating, especially your questions about whether he feels scapegoated by the campaign and also who else had access, who might have had access to their data as these firewalls were down. We'll wait to see where this goes this afternoon. As Jeff Weaver had said, they are willing to take the DNC to court if they do not unfreeze their access. Wild hour we've been watching, and in the lower side of your screen, we are waiting for the president to come out and hold his year-end press conference. Brian Williams is standing by to carry us through that. Brian.
Thomas, a wild hour indeed. All of it political news. Thank you for that. The president is about to give his 5th